My top 5 athletes growing up, it starts with Don Mattingly. My first love was baseball. My first team that I fell in love with were the Yankees. The first game I went to was a Yankee game at Yankee Stadium, and Mattingly was the guy I gravitated toward. Late 80s, early 90s, the Yankees weren't very good, but he was sort of our beacon of light. And probably pains me more than anything as a Yankee fan not to see him win a championship because they had so much success. In fact, before he joined the team and then after he retired as well. But Mattingly was everything. Every time he changed his batting stance, I changed my batting stance in Little League. The way he could, pick a low hop throw at first base. I used to practice that in the driveway. It was hard because I was right-handed. He was a natural lefty, but it was the eye black. It was the swing. To me, he was baseball. And I had the Hitman poster just like every other kid in New York and New Jersey growing up in that time period. Bernie Williams was kind of the guy that I gravitated toward post-Mattingly. He kind of came up in the early 90s and was on the Columbus shuttle going up and down for a little bit. And, people said he was fast. They were going to make him a base stealer, but he wasn't a great base runner. And then he kind of figured out who he was. And, the core four of Posada, Jeter, Pettit, and Rivera, I feel Bernie's the forgotten guy. And Bernie was there before all of them. And he hit in the middle of the lineup on those dynasty teams that won the 4 titles in 5 years. He was smooth as anything in center field. I mean, gliding out there. Sometimes it looked like he wasn't even trying. Switch hitter with power, won a batting title, who hit for average, was an all-star. And the guy had some huge hits in the playoffs. There was the walk-off in 96 in Game 1 against the Orioles in the ALCS. Hit a huge home run against the Braves in that World Series off Greg McMichael. He had some huge hits over his career with the Yankees. Big game player. And I got a chance to meet him when I worked at ESPN. One of the nicest guys, too. And that's kind of really neat when you see some of your childhood heroes and, the myth and the man match up. Michael Jordan. Now, that's an easy one. I was a 90s kid, and we all wanted to be like Mike. I practiced all of his moves in the driveway. Obviously, couldn't even dunk. But, switching hands in midair and doing the shrug after he hit a shot. He was the guy we wanted to be like. We wanted to be like Mike. Everybody I grew up around was a Knicks fan, and I always gravitated toward Jordan, so I kind of became a Bulls fan, and it was nice to be not just a thorn in this side, but, the team that always kept the Knicks down and kept Ewing and those guys from winning a championship. So I think Jordan probably had as great an impact as anybody on my childhood. And I don't think there's an athlete that invoked their imagination as much as Michael Jordan. These days I have a huge role in college basketball at ESPN, and I got into college basketball with Seton Hall, and that was Terry DeHare. Seton Hall in the late 80s and early 90s in the state of New Jersey was bigger than the Nets. They weren't even Seton Hall. They were just the Hall. And DeHare wasn't on the team that, lost to Glenn Rice and Michigan in the championship, but he was on some really good Seton Hall teams during some of the best years of Big East basketball. And it's funny, I ended up going to Syracuse, and I'm still a big Syracuse fan, but I used to hate Syracuse growing up because they would always seem to have the Hall's number. And DeHare was my guy with Danny Hurley and Karnisovas and Luther Wright. And those were kind of the first teams that I really got into from a basketball standpoint because the Nets were so bad at the time. So everybody in New Jersey would go to Seton Hall games. And then the last one was Jerry Rice. I always just admired the smoothness in his game. He was always open, and he wasn't the fastest guy. He was always open, and he wasn't the biggest guy. And, man, he always caught touchdowns. And the Niners in the 90s were on TV all the time. We didn't have cable, so we watched sports basically what was on television. And it always seemed to be Montana or Young throwing to Rice. I was admired. I said, man, this guy is just so good and so consistent year in, year out. I've only owned one football jersey my entire life, and I'm a Jet fan, and that was the Jerry Rice jersey.